Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so all month long, we are talking about the connection between environmental racism and injustice and mental health. And so in this second episode in that series, we will be discussing research that demonstrates the fact that simply living, just living, near large industrial activity leads to negative mental health outcomes. And this is before we talk about the actual pollution and its impacts. I'm just talking about the mere fact that there is industry around you, all around you. That alone causes residents to deal with mental health issues, right? So what does living near industry do to a person's mental health? And what do we need to know about the impact of industry on mental health? These are the questions that we need to answer. And so that's what we're going to do in this episode. Stay tuned. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I'm Dr. Joseph. Thank you for listening. On this episode, we're talking about research related to living near industrial activity. And the main question is simply this: what are the mental health impacts of living near industrial activity? Well, it just so happens that that is the title of research that was done by the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. In 2005, they did a study, and I know 2005 was a long time ago, but this study is still relevant today. In this study, researchers with the NIH asked that exact question, and what they found was very, very interesting. So this is what they found. First, they found that residential proximity to industrial activity has a negative impact on mental health. And in their research, they identified 3 ways that this impact occurs. One is through direct impact on the residents. So the industrial activity in the area directly impacts their mental health. 2, one of the ways that this impact occurs is through the residents' perception of their neighborhood. How they view their neighborhood with that activity happening is one of the ways that their mental health is impacted. And 3, their mental health is impacted by feelings of powerlessness and feelings of hopelessness. So these are the ways that living near industrial activity impacts your mental health. So let's talk about them one by one. Let's go through them and understand them a little bit better. So first, living near industrial activity has direct mental health impacts on the residents in the community. And so to understand this fully, we have to understand stress and what stress does to a person. So stress, you know this, I know this, stress is everywhere. Every person, no matter who you are, no matter where you live, no matter what you do, you will deal with stress. It's just inescapable. Now, there are 2 general sources of stress that you'll experience just living through life. The first source of stress is described as a discrete life event. So these are things that happen at a moment. Sometimes they're unexpected. Sometimes you can see them coming, but these specific events cause stress in a person's life. And you know these events, things like losing your job, or someone in your family dying, or a close friend dying, or if you get a divorce, or any kind of major life event, particularly negative ones, can cause stress in a person's life, in your life, in my life. And these events cause stress, and they can lead to mental health issues, right? So these are the kind of events that people usually seek treatment for, seek counseling for once they happen or after they've occurred. The people who are impacted typically hopefully they seek help for their mental stability and to work through experiencing that life event. And so these are called discrete life events. The second source of stress is commonly referred to as chronic stress. These are things that are ongoing and continuous, right? These stressors are typically associated with particular social contexts, where you live, what your day-to-day life is like, situations that don't seem to go away, that impact you each and every day. So you can think about things like dealing with economic hardship, right? Not having enough resources to support yourself or your family on a consistent basis. That's a source of chronic stress. If you've lost a spouse or someone who cared for you or that you cared for, that you lived in close proximity to. Now you're living your life without that person and having to do things without that person. That's the source of chronic stress. Things like living in a war zone where there's just constant missiles and gunfire and bombs, and you can just day to day not know what the days are going to be like. That's a source of chronic stress. Being under the threat of violence, being in an abusive relationship where you don't know what's going to happen from day to day. These are sources of chronic stress. It's stressful. It's stressful to live in poverty. It's stressful to know that if you miss a check, if you miss one payment, or if you have a situation come up that's unexpected, that you'll be plunged into economic hardship. That's stressful. It's stressful to live in an environment where your life is constantly in danger, where you don't know from day to day how it's going to go for you. It is really, really stressful to live in these conditions. So you have the first type of stress, a discrete life event that happens in a moment, and you have to try to work through it. Then you have chronic stress that is ongoing and continuous and enduring day after day. And so here's the thing. Researchers all agree that chronic stress has a greater impact on your mental health and psychological well-being than the discrete life events. To live under that constant chronic stress is worse for you and for your mental health than those individual events that may take place throughout your life. And so that's what brings us back to this idea of living in an industrial zone, a place where there's industrial activity all around you. It has a direct impact on your mental health because it is a chronic stressor to live in that environment. Now, we know that living near this activity can harm you physically. We already know that. Cancer, asthma, heart disease, respiratory disease, so many different illnesses can come from being exposed to the pollution that these activities emit in the community. But just having that activity there, living in that environment just in of itself is a source of chronic stress, ongoing discomfort, uneasiness. And that chronic stress leads to psychological distress and mental health issues. That's why people in this research who live near this activity reported higher levels of depression and high levels of anxiety. Because when you wake up every morning and you see tons of pollution all around you, and the air is unbreathable, the water is undrinkable, you're not sure if your children, if you or your parents, people that you care about, are going to be healthy from day to day. It takes a toll on your mental health. It constantly wears down on you. Even if you feel okay physically, that mental health strain is a problem. It's just so stressful to live in these environments. So living near this industrial activity has a direct negative impact on your mental health because of that chronic stress that it causes. The second thing that they found in the study is that living near industrial activity impacts your mental health because of the perception of your neighborhood as a result of the presence of that activity. These researchers talk about this idea of neighborhood disorder, which they define as repeated violations of neighborhood norms with the neighborhood boundaries. In other words, look, we all have an idea of what a neighborhood is and what it should be. We all know what it should be like to live in a neighborhood. It should be clean. It should be safe. It should be free from violence. It should be friendly, right? Welcoming. We should enjoy living in our neighborhoods, living in our communities. But that can be violated. That can be disordered when there's rampant drug use and violence, when there's poverty and trash and pollution, when there's people who are being rude and mean and not neighborly. That's not what a neighborhood is. That's not why you moved into that neighborhood. You moved in there with an expectation that you'll have a safe, clean, fun, friendly place to live. And so according to the research, consistently seeing your neighborhood disordered increases your psychological distress. It increases the anxiety and the depression that you'll experience because you're reminded when you go to your neighborhood that this isn't right. This is not what a neighborhood should be. I shouldn't see large smokestacks. I shouldn't see so much dirty air around me. I shouldn't see so much of this activity, this industrial activity in my neighborhood. This is not what a neighborhood should be. This is not how we should live. And that's what having this industrial activity in your neighborhood does. It creates this sense of disorder. And everybody knows it. We all see it. We hear the noise from the facility. We see the heavy traffic, the big semi-trucks and transfer trucks and supply trucks in and out of your neighborhood. You see the beauty, the greenery, the trees, things being cleared out and removed, and the beauty being eroded by this activity happening and all of the expansion that's taking place in and around your neighborhood, right? There's fewer parks. There are fewer playgrounds. There's no green space. No place to just sit and enjoy nature. It's not there because this industry, these polluting activities have taken all that out and removed it. And so even if you can convince me or convince someone else that, hey, this activity is not harmful, it's not going to cause you any physical illnesses, it's not going to be an issue, even if you were able to convince a lot of people of that, they would still look at the fact that there's an industry in their neighborhood and say, this is not right. This is an undesirable, unsafe, unneighborly type of neighborhood. And you wouldn't want to live there, because we all know that neighborhoods were not meant to house large industrial facilities. That's not what a neighborhood is. Neighborhoods are meant to be clean and welcoming places for families and loved ones to enjoy. No one likes disorder. No one likes to live in a place where the true function can't be realized because of the activity happening around it. Nobody wants that. Nobody needs that. And nobody should have to endure that. And so to see your neighborhood in disorder increases that stress, which increases your psychological distress, which leads to some significant mental health challenges, just knowing that it's there. That is the problem. And so that's the second thing that these researchers found, that seeing a neighborhood in disorder because of the invasion and the promulgation of all this activity, this industrialized activity, causes negative mental health impacts. And third, living near industrial activity impacts your mental health because of the feeling of powerlessness. Just think about that. So it's amazing what feeling empowered can do for a person, right? It's amazing to have agency over your life and over your future. Just think about it. Like, you wake up and you believe that you can do anything, and that whatever situation you're in, you believe that you can change that situation with what you're doing or what you're involved in or what you're striving toward, right? You might think, hey, when I get my degree, I get my education, I can change what's happening around us. I can change the situation, right? When I get my business off the ground and start getting my business up and running, things are going to be different here. They're not going to be the same, right? When I get my music or my art, or my athletic ability, when someone recognizes it, when the right person sees what I can do and gives me an opportunity, I'm going to be on my way. We're going to be moving on up, right? That sense of empowerment, that sense of agency, that sense of, hey, I can determine my future and what we're going to be. Like, that does amazing things for your mental health. It does amazing things for the way you see the world and yourself and how you envision your life moving forward. Now compare that to having a sense of powerlessness, right? The idea that your life and your future is determined by things outside your control. So if you get that degree, if you get that opportunity, you still won't be able to get your situation changed. No matter what you do, no matter what you strive towards, nothing in your environment, nothing in your community is ever any different. This is the kind of feeling that people have when they live near these types of large industrial facilities, when they see more and more pollution and more plants and facilities and factories coming into their neighborhoods. You get this overwhelming sense of powerlessness. You're not deciding who gets to come and build here. You don't get a chance to have a say in how they operate. All of these things lead to a sense of powerlessness, hopelessness. And that overwhelming sense of powerlessness leads to increased psychological distress, anxiety, depression. And it makes sense. It's easy to understand why that would be the case when you think about it, because the decisions about what happens in these neighborhoods, they're made by people who don't live there or have any connection to the people that live there. And the people that decide what constitutes safe levels of pollution and how to permit and how to regulate these facilities, they make their decisions without any input from the communities or the community leaders. It's just done outside of their involvement and input. So you live there, you're experiencing it, but you have no say in what happens. And in many cases, when you try to protest, when you try to oppose these activities, nothing changes. The decisions are still made, things are still being done, regardless of the fact that you don't want it to happen. You don't want that facility to come. You go to the meetings and you say no. You protest, you say no, and they still build it. It still comes and it still pollutes. And so it's no wonder that researchers have found that living in these conditions and being powerless leads to increased feelings of fear and distress and anxiety and depression. Because it's already bad enough that you're surrounded by this activity, but when you have no recourse, right? When you're not able to vote for who makes the decisions because you live in an unincorporated area, you're outside city limits, you don't have any representation. When your area where you live is all of a sudden rezoned for industry. It wasn't industry when you got there. It wasn't industry when you built your home there, but they've decided that this is going to now be industrial zone, right? When these facilities come into your neighborhood, despite your opposition, you're protesting, you're demonstrating, when regulators refuse to monitor your air or your water or regulate or sanction people when they violate their permits, when all this is happening, it leads to intense feelings of powerlessness, which can damage you mentally and lead to distress and depression and anxiety. The research is very, very clear on this. This is what happens when you have those intense feelings of fear and powerlessness. This is the result. And so just to recap, this NIH study, talked about these 3 ways that living near industrial activity impacts your mental health. They say it directly impacts it due to chronic stress. It says that it impacts it by showing your neighborhood to be disordered and not what it should be. And it leads to a sense of powerlessness and hopelessness. All of these things come from living near an industrial facility, living on the fence line in these areas. And so what does that mean for us? What does that mean now that we know this information, now that we can see that just the presence of this industrial activity leads to these mental health outcomes? For me, the first thing is we need to have an investment in neighborhood-wide mental health services for these communities, for these fence line communities. We know now that the fact that this industry is there causes these mental health issues. We need to respond accordingly with those services. Have them in the school system for the children. Have them in community centers where people meet and gather, senior centers. Have them at churches, any kind of gathering place, libraries. We should have them wherever we can get them in order to make sure that we're being intentional about addressing these issues. And second, there needs to be more community engagement and involvement in the decision making. That's a simple one. You come to the community and you say, these are the plans that are put forth before us. What do you think? How can we work together? How can we develop this community, this neighborhood, this area in a way where we all benefit? And I promise you, you get feedback from the community. You get ideas about how to move forward. You empower them and you show them that their voice matters and that their feedback matters. You rebuild trust. You allow them to have agency over their communities. And I promise you, you can solve a lot of problems just by listening and responding. And I would argue that if you just did that, you'd see huge improvements in the quality of life, big improvements in the way neighborhoods and their residents respond to things changing in their neighborhoods. You would see so much more positive influences because they know what their communities need. They know the challenges better than anybody. You just listen to them. They know what is needed in the area. Let the community decide. Do they believe that it's valuable to have them come to our neighborhood? Do we believe that it's worthwhile to invest in their activities? Or should we do other things to build our community up instead? Let the community and its members decide that, not people outside the community who have no connection to the community imposing these polluting industrial facilities onto the communities. We don't need that. We need true, transparent, authentic community engagement. That would be one way that we can really address this issue. So there is so much more that can be said about this. right? I've included several research studies in the description if you want to read more about it and learn more about it. But above all, we need to recognize that there are negative mental health implications with just living, simply living near industrial activity. Just living near them brings negative mental health issues. And so knowing that, now that we know that, when we see it, we can respond accordingly and we can make a big difference just with that knowledge. A big difference. And that's it. That's the episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.